60 feet north of Oakland Avenue. Is there anybody who would like to speak for this issue? Is there anybody that would like to speak against this issue? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Slough, second Mr. Hellman. Any further discussion? Hearing none, sorry. Yeah, if you want to speak, you need to come up to the, okay, one moment. Okay, you need to state your name, your address, and then you've got 3 minutes. Okay. Mr. Russell.
Yeah, this is being rezoned from an industrial use so that they can put an industrial building there, as currently zoned, to residential. So this is to a less intrusive usage, unless the people own the property, and they have a right to enjoy the uses, benefit of the property. So they could go put a factory there in an industrial, as an industrial use. I'm in favor of this because it makes it less, it's more harmonious, especially with the area, to make it residential. And we are definitely lacking housing. I understand what you're saying, but I think this is a move in the right step, or the right direction. Because the alternative is that they will develop it in its zoned manner, industrial, and I don't think that is particularly appropriate for that location.
Yes, sir. Yes. Well, I disagree with that statement. I understand that there is industrial uses, but with the restrictions, they got to be 50 foot off the road and behind. So with that measurement, you only have not much to be able to build with industrial. And then you also have on each side restrictions according to your zoning. So I don't really think you're going to have industrial go into there because it's not a really good selling point. And then also, what kind of housing is going to go? Like, you're going to have low income housing, possibly apartments across there. I mean, if you look at it, the trees have definitely been there for a long time. So when when she bought the property, you would think that that's part of the park if you don't look it up. So, I mean, I think selling points, it's gonna decrease our house by a lot.
Any further questions or comments? Thank you. Before you leave, will you let our clerk know? I'm not sure if we heard exactly your name because the microphone was turned off, okay? Let her know or write it down and hand it to one of us. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Hellman, second Mr. Slough. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Okay, thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody to the November 16th, 2021 regular session of Findlay City Council. We will start with roll call.
Mr. Greeno,
Here.
Mr. Haas, Mr. Hellman,
Here.
Mr. Niemeyer,
Here.
Mr. Palmer,
Here.
Mr. Russell,
Here.
Mr. Schindeldecker,
Here.
Mr. Slough,
Here.
Ms. Warnicki,
Here.
and Mr. Wobser.
Mr. Russell.
Move to excuse Councilman Wobser and Councilman Haas from tonight's meeting.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of excusing Mr. Wobser and Mr. Haas say aye. Any opposed, nay? They are excused. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and followed by a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I will accept a motion for the previous meeting's minutes. Mr. Slough,
So moved.
second, Mr. Palmer. Any discussion? All those in favor of accepting the previous city council meeting minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? They are accepted. Mr. Russell, do we have any add-ons, replacements, or removals from tonight's agenda?
We have an add-on resolution 21-2021, which is for the One Ohio Memo of Understanding, MOU, for opioid litigation settlement funds. And we have a replacement for Ordinance 2021-118, just some wording in the funds. And I would move that the one be added and the other be replaced.
Second, Mr. Slough. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the changes to tonight's agenda say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? The changes are made. We have no proclamations, recognition, or retirement resolutions, no oral communications, petitions.
A zoning amendment for 0 South Main Street for parcel number 6200010220882 from a Lindsay, Neal, project manager of Arco Construction Company Incorporated. It's for the senior living multifamily on behalf of Country Club Acres Incorporated. They'd like to change the zoning to M2 multifamily high density. It's currently C2 general commercial.
Questions or comments? This will be referred to Planning Commission and Planning and Zoning Committee. Written communications, we have none. Reports of municipal officers and departments.
City income tax monthly collections report for October 2021.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Findlay Fire Department activities report for October 2021.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Findlay Municipal Court activities report for October 2021.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Findlay Police Departmental activities report for October 2021.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Treasurer's reconciliation report for October 31st, 2021.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
October 2021 monthly budget summary from Mayor Mern.
Questions or comments? Mr. Russell.
Mayor, you want to give us a best guess as to how this year is going to wrap up from your budget perspective?
Yes, thank you. Happy to do that. Overall, things are looking really good. Our finances have been kept under control. As you can see, we've really been in line with kind of our projections, as well as our goal is always to kind of be 90% of our budgeted expenses. So overall, I would expect that our departments will once again be giving some funds back from our previously approved budget. Additionally, our revenue has been coming in quite strong. I know that we're starting to see a little bit of lag in timing because of mail. So for example, Monday, our numbers were looking down for the month, but then today we had a lot of collections come in. So we're starting to kind of see that timing, and you may see that through the end of the year, but overall revenues are still coming in quite strong. So happy with our overall performance and would expect that we'll be able to add some cash back to our reserves once again.
Any other questions or comments? Summary to be filed.
Let's see. Letter from Mayor Mern for an appointment to the Blanchard Valley Port Authority. This appointment requires council's confirmation.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
I move that council confirm the appointment of Craig Anderson to the Blanchard Valley Port Authority.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. He is appointed.
This summary financial reports as of October 31st, 2021.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Traffic Commission minutes as of for October 18th, 2021.
Questions or comments? Minutes to be filed.
Parking Authority minutes for November 8th, 2021.
Questions or comments? Minutes to be filed.
Letter from Mayor Mern regarding a Shade Tree Commission appointment. This appointment does not require council confirmation.
Questions or comments? Appointment to be filed. Committee reports.
The Downtown Findlay Improvement District Annual Meeting minutes of November 3rd, 2021.
Questions or comments? Mr. Russell.
So I am council's representative to the DFID board, and annual meeting was held a couple weeks ago. And a couple of real quick highlights that's going on with the Downtown Findlay Improvement District. Number one, they are the ones that are responsible for the flowers. And this year, a new little change. We actually had we started sponsorship opportunities to help bring in some more revenue for the district to help that they could use in their beautification efforts. And we had 25 folks who sponsored them. They had the little plaques out there. I think that's going to happen again next year. The DFID also hires a maintenance crew to go around picking up trash and cigarette butts and spraying weeds. And actually that maintenance plan was used as part of our DORA application. In part of the DORA requirement is that we had a way to take care of any trash that would happen because of the DORA, and the DORA application referenced the fact that the DFID had this maintenance plan in effect. You'll also see on the cleanliness side the cigarette butt containers and now dog waste containers or bags, and those are popular. We know they're popular because they're being used. And so the district is the folks that work on this board are they're dedicated. I'd especially mention that Jill Wagner with Wasboro Properties she gives her heart and soul into the downtown, into the DFID, and really doesn't get enough thanks for all that she does. And they'll continue to be working. If you have questions or comments about the board or about the downtown, as I said, I do sit on the board, as does the mayor, and we'll be happy to take any questions, comments, suggestions to the board, and work to continue to make our downtown the jewel that it is. Thanks.
Any other further questions or comments? Minutes to be filed. Legislation, we'll start with a resolution.
Resolution 21-2021, an emergency resolution to accept the material terms of the One Ohio subdivision settlement pursuant to the One Ohio Memorandum of Understanding and consistent with the terms of the July 21st, 2021 National Opioid Settlement Agreement.
Mr. Russell.
I spoke with Don prior to the meeting. This requires 3 readings, and it also needs to be, we need to give it consideration tonight because it needs to be executed by November 19th. For that reason, I would move that council's statutory rules be suspended and resolution 021-2021 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Hellman. All those in favor of suspending the rules say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
And Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give this resolution its second and third reading.
Resolution 21-2021, Resolution 21-2021.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of 021-2021.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion. Ms. Mayor.
So thank you for suspending the rules. Just to give a little bit of context, we received this yesterday, and as tends to move quickly with these settlement agreements, they would like a response by Friday of us accepting it. As you may note, this is consistent with the One Ohio Memorandum of Understanding that we executed earlier this year. This is specific to the Janssen settlement agreement. So if you recall, earlier in the year, we had an agreement that was with McKesson and some of the other companies. So this is a separate agreement consistent with the prior agreement that was accepted. So this would be money on top of the monies that we had previously agreed to accept.
Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the resolution say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
And Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
The resolution is adopted. Ordinances.
Third reading for ordinance 2021-99. An ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director and/or City Engineer of the City of Findlay, Ohio to advertise for bids where required and enter into contracts for various projects, appropriating and transferring funds for said capital expenditures, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Slough.
I would move for adoption of ordinance 2021-099.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance 2021-099 say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
And Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Third reading for ordinance 2021-100, an ordinance appropriating funds and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Greeno.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2021-100.
Second, Mr. Slough. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of ordinance 2021-100 say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
And Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Third reading for ordinance 2021-102, an ordinance authorizing the mayor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to waive formal advertising and bidding requirements and enter into a contract with Scott Basinger to continue to provide legal services of filing garnishments on behalf of the city of Findlay Income Tax Department in Findlay Municipal Court and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Slough.
I would move for adoption of ordinance 2021-102.
Second, Ms. Warnicki. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of ordinance 2021-102 say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
And Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Third reading for ordinance 2021-105, an ordinance vacating a certain portion of a certain road right-of-way hereinafter referred to as the Londonderry Drive vacation in the city of Findlay, Ohio.
Mr. Greeno.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2021-105.
Second, Mr. Slough. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of ordinance 2021-105 say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
And Mr. Russell.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Third reading for ordinance 2021-106, an ordinance amending Chapter 1100 et sec of the codified ordinances of the city of Findlay, Ohio, known as the zoning code, by rezoning the following described property referred to as the Tella Inc. Park Street and Oakland Avenue rezone, which previously was zoned I-1 Light Industrial to R4 Duplex Triplex High Density.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of 2021-106.
Second, Mr. Slough. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of ordinance 2021-106, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
And Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Second reading for ordinance 2021-107, an ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service Safety of the City of Findlay, Ohio to extend the current contract for services provided by the combination of the Hancock County General Health District and the City of Findlay Health Department until December 31st, 2022, and declaring an emergency. Second reading for ordinance 2021-109, an ordinance repealing current Chapter 147 et sec of the codified ordinances of the City of Findlay, Ohio, and dissolving the parking authority. Second reading for ordinance 2021-110, an ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency. Second reading for ordinance 2021-111, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and/or service safety director of the City of Findlay, Ohio to enter into a contract with Planning Next to provide consulting services and implementing a strategic plan for the City of Findlay, appropriating funds thereto, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
Planning Next has started to do some preliminary work with the city, and the desire is to keep this thing going and get started. There's the contract has been reviewed both by the city and the Strategic Planning Committee, and obviously Planning Next, and we're ready to actually get going with this. So for that reason, I'd move that council statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2021-111 be given its third reading.
Second, Mr. Hellman. All those in favor of suspending the rules, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Mr. Russell, I'm
Aye.
sorry.
So the rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give this ordinance its third reading.
Ordinance 2021-111, ordinance 2021-111.
Mr. Greeno.
Move for adoption of ordinance number 2021-111.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor of the ordinance, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Nay.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
And Mr. Slough.
Aye.
1 favor, 7 ayes, 1 nay. 7 votes.
7. Yeah, the rules of Mr. Russell.
I'd like to make a motion to table this ordinance so that we can give it consideration, so that it doesn't pass today without the ability to have it be done on a emergency. Otherwise, we will have to wait 45 days to execute the contract. So I would like to table it, and then at the next meeting, we'll give it consideration again when we have a full slate of 10 people here, and give it a chance that it can get the 8 votes needed to be executed at the current time. Or ask that Councilman Niemeyer reconsider his no vote, because his no vote doesn't give it the 8 votes necessary to pass on emergency. So,
I hear a motion. Do I hear a second?
so it's a motion to table.
Second, Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of tabling ordinance number 2000-111, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
And Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
The ordinance is tabled.
Second reading for ordinance 2021-113. An ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director and/or City Engineer of the City of Findlay, Ohio to sign and execute a grant agreement or agreements with the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency for improvements to the Spring Lake Sanitary Upgrade Design Grant, project number 356-11600, to accept any and all funds associated with said grant, appropriating funds thereto, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Palmer.
I move the council's statutory rules be suspended and this ordinance be given its third reading.
Second, Ms. Warnicki. All those in favor of suspension of the rules, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
And Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give ordinance 2021-113 its third reading.
Ordinance 2021-113.
Mr. Palmer.
Move for adoption of ordinance number 2021-113.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor of ordinance 2021-113, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Niemeyer.
He's busy.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
And Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Second reading for ordinance 2021-114. An ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Russell.
There is a desire to get this, this project also, moving, and, therefore I'd ask that the I'd move that council statutory rules be suspended in 2021-114, be given its third reading.
Second, Mr. Greeno. All those in favor of suspending the rules, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Did I skip Mr. Russell?
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give ordinance 2021-114 its third reading.
Ordinance 2021-114.
Mr. Greeno.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2021-114.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor of the ordinance, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
And Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Second reading for ordinance 2021-115. An ordinance authorizing the mayor and/or service safety director of the city of Findlay, Ohio to grant an additional 18% salary increase for the current information systems manager position, which would exceed the allotted 8% of current codified ordinance number 2020-121 of the city of Findlay, Ohio, known as the salary ordinance, and declaring an emergency. Sorry. First reading for ordinance 2021-116. Bob, you want me to read it?
Need to read it, sorry.
An ordinance establishing job classifications, pay ranges, salary schedules, and other matters that may affect pay for all non-elected officers and employees of Findlay, Ohio, and repealing ordinance number 2020-121, ordinance number 2021-042, ordinance number 2021-068, ordinance number 2021-97, and all other ordinances and/or parts of ordinances in conflict herewith, and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2021-117. An ordinance authorizing the auditor to make payroll deductions for those employees who have elected to enroll in the health savings account plan and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2021-118. An ordinance authorizing the mayor and/or service safety director of the city of Findlay, Ohio to enter into a contract with Findlay Hancock County Community Foundation to donate 30 trees to the city of Findlay in celebration of their 30th anniversary. 13th, is that supposed to be? 30th anniversary, appropriating funds thereto and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Palmer.
Since this is a donation to the city, I move that council statutory rules be suspended and ordinance number 2021-118 be given its second and third readings.
Second, Mr. Hellman. All those in favor of the suspension of the rules, say aye if your name is called, and those opposed, nay.
Mr. Schindeldecker,
Aye.
Mr. Slough, Ms. Warnicki,
Aye.
Mr. Greeno,
Aye.
Mr. Hellman,
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer,
Aye.
Mr. Palmer,
Aye.
and Mr. Russell.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give ordinance 2021-118 its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2021-118, ordinance 2021-118.
Mr. Palmer.
Move for adoption of ordinance number 2021-118.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion. Mr. Schindeldecker.
I'd like to ask the mayor, Mr. Martin, do we have any idea where these plantings will be located?
Yes, so at this point, the plan would be that these would be trees that would go, when the phase 2 benching occurs, there will be opportunities kind of along Main Street and potentially along the top edge to plant trees. Says it's kind of an entryway, but also will not impede the flood benefit that would be received from this project, and that is currently the intention, obviously assuming that we still have to work through the design process.
Sounds good, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Ms. Warren.
I was just curious, because on the replacement and in the title of the ordinance, it says 3, but it's, is it 30 trees or 3? Okay, it was just,
Any other further questions or comments? Mr. Hellman.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I'd just like to say, to thank the Findlay Hancock County Community Foundation for the donation, and also congratulate them on their 30th anniversary. Job well done. Thanks.
Any other further questions or comments? Hearing none. All those in favor of the ordinance 2021-118, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Slough, Ms. Warnicki,
aye.
Mr. Greeno,
Aye.
Mr. Hellman,
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer, Mr. Palmer,
Aye.
Mr. Russell,
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted. Old business. Mr. Stashak.
Yes, thank you. You all should have a packet with a lot of numbers on it that you got when you got in tonight that I put on your spots before you got here. It is the projected total cost for the union and non-union wage increases. You passed the union agreements so swiftly, and we had not been asked or given an opportunity to get you these figures. So with the payroll ordinance in tonight's packet, didn't know how quickly you were going to pass that, so I wanted to make sure my office had completed its due diligence. And based on that, across all contracts and the non-union salary ordinance, that's 2021-116, the total projected cost, and again, projected cost because there are a few averages and a few things that have to be projected forward, is about $1.2 million, or $1,247,000. 2023, the total cost across all those pieces of legislation is $2,725,000. And 2024, it's projected at $2,751,000 using the formulas and assuming they're all applied evenly and per the verbiage. And then the supplementary pages behind are the actual detail and how that breaks down into whether it be stipends, allowances, overtime with the figures we know today. And every figure that you see is based on a 2021 figure, and those costs that I just quoted to you are costs over and above the 2021 figure. So that's not a cumulative cost across the 3 years. That is the cost over and above 2021. So if anybody has any questions, would like any more detail, I did speak with Councilman Wobser earlier today. He and I were in agreement that this group should get a full set of these documents, and that's why I've distributed them to you tonight. So thank you, if there's no questions.
Questions or comments? Any other old business? Mr. Niemeyer.
I'd like to make a motion to untable ordinance 2021-111.
Second, Mr. Russell. All those in favor of pulling the ordinance off the table, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough? And Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Ordinance 2021-111 is been removed from the table. Mr. Niemeyer.
The reason I voted no on this is, seems like an awful lot of money to pay a out-of-town firm. I guess we'll find out from the results. That'll be all.
Okay. Yeah. So right now it's off the table. If you want to suspend the rules, that motion needs to be made again, or do we just,
I think if Jim wants to change his vote so it's an 8-0 vote and it passes, Jim just needs to request that his vote be changed. I don't believe it. I believe by our rules, it doesn't have to be reread or redone.
back at our law director to make sure that that's okay? Okay, so we do need to suspend the rules again.
No, the rules have been suspended. We just need to take the vote.
Okay, hang on just a second, Ms. Mayor. There's no discussion when you suspend the rules. So the rules of council have I'm sorry. All those in favor of suspending the rules of council say aye if your name is called.
Point of order. We have suspended the rules.
Mr. Niemeyer has to go on the record to change his, so all those in
He
favor.
voted.
Excuse me, Mr. Russell.
He voted 8-0 to suspend the rules.
Excuse me, Mr. Russell.
The question is about his vote to accept the ordinance.
Excuse me, Mr. Russell. So, Mr. Niemeyer has not changed his vote. I've not heard that been done. And so by doing the roll call, we will know who has voted yes, yea, or nay to suspend the rules. I'm done discussing. All those in favor of suspending the rules say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Point of order.
Go ahead and do roll call.
The motion's been made, it's been seconding, all we're doing is a roll call vote. I'm not sure why you're upset that we're doing that again, Mr. Russell. It's just a matter of making sure that the record is correct.
I request that the clerk give the tally of the roll call of the motion to suspend vote.
I guess I'm confused myself because I thought the motion was done table. Is that Are we talking back when it was read? Back when we did it way back?
I believe the confusion is that we already voted to suspend the rules. That vote occurred and it passed 8-0. Subsequently, Mr. Niemeyer voted in opposition, and therefore Councilman Russell voted to table so that we did not have to wait the additional time period of 45 days rather than the 30 days, because we did not, it passed, but with not sufficient votes to be effective immediately. Is that correct?
No, it's not correct. It did not pass 8-0. It passed 7-1.
But
With just second, Mr. Niemeyer voted against the suspension of the rules.
no, he voted in favor of suspending the rules. It was given its readings. He voted against adopting it. Yeah.
Okay. So, Mr. Russell, to appease your discussion that seems to be futile here, what do you want me to do? So,
I believe that
So-
our council rules allow a member to change the vote on a vote taken tonight or on a vote taken tonight. And in the discussion with Councilman Niemeyer, I understand his reason for voting no, but he also understands the implications of voting no tonight with 2 members absent. If Mr. Niemeyer wishes to change his vote, he may do so.
I have no problem with that, but there's nothing on the record that where he has changed his vote. And that's what I'm trying to do, put it on the record.
Was it the motion to untable only?
Right now, the only motion I have, and it's been accepted by Mr. Niemeyer, is to pull the ordinance from the table.
So he needs to make the motion to vote, adopt.
So my suggestion,
The law
whether
doesn't
it's
want to
follows,
go
just a
through.
second, Mr. Niemeyer, whether it follows the rules of council or not, the rules of council are based on Robert's Rules of Order, that if Mr. Niemeyer wants to reconsider the suspension vote of nay, right, that has to go on the record.
He voted,
Correct?
he voted in favor of the suspension.
No, it's suspension of the rules, 7-1.
The suspension of the rules was 8-0.
Right, to adopt was so.
All right,
table,
I'm mistaken.
Table.
Okay, so the ordinance has, go ahead,
I
Mr. Niemeyer.
would-
Just a second, let me finish. I don't like people interrupting me. Please don't do it. If you want to discuss it, I'll call on you eventually. So, Mr. Niemeyer, I'm confirming that you voted yay to suspend the rules, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. So the rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk has given this ordinance its second and third reading. At this point in time, Mr. Niemeyer.
I would just like to change my vote on the ordinance to yea instead of nay. Ordinance,
On the adoption,
ordinance 2021-111.
correct? Okay? That's sufficient enough. So the ordinance is adopted 8-0. Thank you.
Sorry.
Other old business. New business. Mr. Schindeldecker.
It's been a very difficult year and a half for all of us and all of the phases of our lives. We've spent a lot of time congratulating and thanking emergency workers, law enforcement people, and so on and so forth. And they deserve that and even more. I'd like to add some thanks for some of the people who put a smile on our faces. It's been an especially difficult time for the arts, scheduling programs, not knowing if they could have a full house, et cetera, et cetera. We seem to be back in order for the most part, and I particularly want to thank the Fort Findlay Playhouse, the Marathon Center for the Performing Arts, both the university and Findlay City Schools, not only for their arts, but for the outstanding athletic programs, and also for the Hancock Historical Museum. I don't know what we would do without them. We found out a little bit of that, and I don't think any of us liked it last year, but thanks to all of them.
Other new business. Mr. Russell.
I'm calling an ad hoc committee meeting for council assignments for 2022 and any rules revision for November 29th at 5 p.m. in council offices.
Mr. Russell, I noticed that you had forwarded the current rules and current committee assignments. Do you want any homework done prior to that meeting?
The email to the council reps request information, so, yes.
Thank you. Ms. Mayor.
Sometimes you're so quick, we all gotta jump and compete to get it. Councilman Schindeldecker, point well made, for sure. And the last couple of weeks, we have seen some wonderful shows in our community, great athletic performance, great musical performances, and it's wonderful to, one, be back together as a community and hopefully doing so in a safe manner, as well as seeing our teams and many performances achieve at a very high level. We're very fortunate, so thank you for bringing that up. A couple quick notes. Wanted to mention there was a press release sent out today. I sent you guys a note just in case you saw it prior to the press, but wanted to note that Hancock County and Blanchard River, I keep saying Blanchard River, Maumee Watershed Conservancy District was awarded just over $7 million to fund the improvements to the Norfolk Southern Railroad Bridge as part of the flood mitigation projects. We were actually the only project in the state of Ohio to receive such funding through the federal government for that project. So very excited. That was through a lot of hard work. I want to give a shout out to Brian Thomas, who did a lot of work behind the scenes to get that application completed and prior to his departure, and then certainly Jeremy when he took over, and Steve Wilson and the county and city and state government and Stantec, we all worked and got a lot of support at all levels to really make sure the application had its best chances, and obviously continuing to benefit from being on top of those different grant opportunities. So that will be great and keep flood mitigation efforts moving forward in Findlay, Hancock County. So that's great to see. Another item I wanted to mention, I know I heard a couple of you talking about it before this meeting, but the city is working. We were contacted by the Humane Society regarding some feral cat issues that were occurring throughout town, but in a couple of neighborhoods specifically. The city of Findlay is going to be paying some dollars, probably up to about $5,000 over the next couple of months, to help mitigate some of that issue with neutering and spaying and kind of getting some of the sick cats off of the streets. So we are taking that seriously, and additional information will be going out to the public on that. Sorry that we still are having some technical issues. We'll reevaluate what's going on. But I think that those were the main points on my side.
Any other new business? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Palmer? Second, Mr. Niemeyer. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed, nay? We are adjourned. Everybody but Mr. Helm.